Some words cut deeper than any blade, especially when you've heard them your whole life. Judah Kane had carried those cruel whispers for 32 years, worthless, slow, good for nothing, but breaking his back in silence. The giant cowboy with scarred hands kept his head down in Silver Spur, believing every harsh word the townsfolk said about him. Then Evelyn Carrington stepped off the stagecoach. She was everything he wasn't: refined, educated, wealthy from her late husband's railroad fortune. She came to run a ranch, and every respectable man in town wanted the job. But when she saw Judah gently helping a lame colt learn to walk, something changed. Against all advice and laughter, she hired him. What she saw in those gentle hands would prove the whole town wrong. What happens when someone finally sees your true worth? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Silver Spur's main street as Judah Kane made his way to the stockyards, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each heavy step. At 6 feet 4 inches, he towered over most men, his broad shoulders filling out a worn cotton shirt that had seen too many washes and too many days of hard labor. His hands, large and calloused, bore the marks of 32 years spent wrestling with barbed wire, breaking horses, and hauling timber reach, scar a testament to a life lived in service to others who barely acknowledged his existence. The town was already stirring to life. Mrs. Henderson swept her front porch with quick, efficient strokes, her eyes following Judah's passage with the kind of look reserved for stray dogs that might soil her clean walkway. At the general store, old Pete Morrison stacked crates of supplies, muttering under his breath about the half-wit who'd probably drop them if asked to help. Judah heard the whispers, felt the stares, and did what he'd always done: kept his head down and kept walking. Silver Spur had grown prosperous in the past decade, thanks to the railroad that brought cattle buyers from back east and the silver mine that employed half the men in town. Main Street boasted a proper hotel, a barber shop with a red-striped pole, and the Copper Dollar Saloon, where respectable men gathered to discuss business over whiskey and cigars. It was a town that valued order, respectability, and knowing one's place. Judah knew his place all too well. The memories came unbidden, as they always did in the quiet morning hours. His father's voice, rough from too much drink and too little patience. "Boys got rocks for brains, Mary. Ain't never going to amount to nothing but a strong back." His mother's gentle attempts at defense had grown weaker over the years until they stopped altogether. When she died of fever when Judah was 12, his father had looked at him with undisguised resentment, as if Judah's continued existence was a cruel reminder of his wife's failure to give him a worthy son. By 14, Judah was working full-time at the Morrison Ranch, sleeping in the bunkhouse with men who treated him like a piece of equipment, useful for the heaviest lifting, but not worth much conversation. He'd learned to read from his mother's old Bible, practiced his letters in the dirt when no one was watching, but kept those small victories to himself. Intelligence was not expected from someone like him, and showing it would only invite more suspicion. The stagecoach was due at noon, and already a small crowd had gathered at the depot. Judah paused in his work, his attention drawn by the unusual bustle of activity. Normally, the Wednesday stage brought mail, supplies, and perhaps a traveling salesman or two, but today felt different. The station master had put on his good coat, and even Mayor Caldwell stood waiting with his hat freshly brushed. She appeared in the coach window, first a glimpse of dark hair beneath a traveling hat adorned with a small ostrich feather. When the driver helped her down, Judah felt something shift in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. Evelyn Carrington was beautiful in a way that belonged to another world entirely. Her traveling dress was a deep blue that matched her eyes, cut in the latest fashion, with small pearl buttons and intricate stitching that spoke of considerable expense. But it wasn't her beauty that stopped him cold. It was the way she carried herself, with quiet confidence and genuine grace. She'd been 22 when she married Thomas Carrington, the railroad man's son with grand plans and gentle eyes. Their 3 years together had been the happiest of her life, filled with morning conversations over coffee and evening walks where they planned their future. Thomas had spoken often of the ranch he'd inherited from his uncle in Colorado Territory, of the wide skies and endless grassland where they would build something lasting together. Then came the telegram that changed everything. A riding accident on an inspection tour, Thomas thrown from his horse and killed instantly. The grief had nearly consumed her, but grief was a luxury she couldn't afford for long. At 25, she found herself the owner of property worth more than most men would see in a lifetime, but with responsibilities that felt heavier than gold. The thin silver band on her left hand caught the sunlight as she adjusted her gloves. She still wore it, not from inability to let go of the past, but as a reminder of what love could be when two people truly saw each other. Thomas had looked past her father's wealth and her carefully cultivated manners to see the woman underneath someone who dreamed of wide spaces and meaningful work, not just drawing-room conversations and charity committees. Now, standing in the dust of Silver Spur with her entire future uncertain, she touched the ring and made herself a promise. Whatever came next, it would be on her own terms. The town's leading men had arranged themselves in what they clearly considered an impressive receiving line. Mayor Caldwell stepped forward first, his smile practiced and his handshake firm. "Mrs. Carrington, welcome to Silver Spur. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing." "Not at all," she replied, though the truth was that 3 days of bouncing in a stagecoach had left her back aching and her patience strained. "I'm eager to see the property and begin work immediately." Behind the mayor, she recognized faces from the correspondence that had preceded her arrival. Marcus Bellweather, the banker, was a thin man with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. Frank Morrison, who owned the largest ranch in the area, possessed the kind of hearty confidence that came from never having his judgment questioned. Dr. Samuel Hayes, the town physician, seemed kind enough, though his wife Clara stood beside him with the sort of pinched expression that suggested she found the entire situation highly irregular. "Mrs. Carrington," Marcus said, stepping forward with an oily smoothness, "I do hope you'll reconsider our correspondence. Managing a ranch of that size is no work for a lady, particularly one unaccustomed to our rough frontier ways. I have several excellent offers from established ranchers who could take the burden off your shoulders." The presumption in his voice set her teeth on edge, but she kept her smile diplomatic. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Bellweather, but I didn't travel 800 miles to sell before I've even seen what my husband left me. I intend to make this work." Of course," the banker said quickly, "but you'll need experienced men to help you. Foremen who understand cattle, the land, the challenges of the territory. I've taken the liberty of arranging meetings with several qualified candidates." From the corner of her eye, Evelyn noticed movement near the stockyards. A giant of a man was working with what appeared to be an injured animal, his massive frame bent over something small and vulnerable. There was something in his posterior gentleness that seemed at odds with his intimidating size that caught her attention. "That would be Judah Kane," Dr. Hayes said, following her gaze. His voice carried the kind of careful neutrality that suggested difficult waters ahead. "He's worked around town for years. Good with animals, strong as an ox, but—" He trailed off meaningfully. "But what?" Evelyn asked. "Well," Clara Hayes interjected with barely concealed disdain, "he's not quite right in the head, if you take my meaning. Simple, really. Fine for hauling freight or breaking his back with manual labor, but hardly management material." Evelyn watched as the big man coaxed the small Animala colt she realized to its feet. The young horse was clearly lame, favoring one leg, but the man's patience was extraordinary. He spoke in low, soothing tones, his scarred hands gentle as he supported the colt's weight. When the animal took its first tentative step, then another, she saw something remarkable happen. The man's entire face transformed with quiet joy, a smile so genuine it made her chest ache. "Has anyone ever given him a real chance?" she asked quietly. The question seemed to take the group by surprise. Marcus Bellweather laughed, a sound like coins clinking in a pocket. "My dear Mrs. Carrington, some people are simply born to their station in life. It's not a matter of chances, it's a matter of natural ability. A man like that couldn't manage a chicken coop, let alone a ranch." The casual cruelty in his words struck her like a physical blow. She'd grown up in a world where worth was measured by bloodlines and bank accounts, where people were dismissed or elevated based on circumstances entirely beyond their control. But watching Judah Kane with that injured colt, she saw something these men had clearly missed: intelligence, patience, and a capacity for gentleness that spoke to character more than any pedigree could. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a new note of steel, "I appreciate your advice, but I believe I'll make my own judgments about who deserves a chance." The statement sent a ripple of unease through the gathered men. Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat diplomatically. "Of course, Mrs. Carrington. We wouldn't presume to make decisions for you. We're simply offering the benefit of local knowledge." But Marcus Bellweather's eyes had narrowed, and she caught something in his expression that made her suddenly wary. This was a man accustomed to getting his way, and her independence clearly didn't sit well with him. "Perhaps," she said, "I should see this ranch of mine before making any decisions about personnel." As the group dispersed with promises to call on her soon, Evelyn found herself walking toward the stockyards. Judah Kane looked up as she approached, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Intelligence, certainly, but also a bone-deep sadness that spoke of years of being dismissed and diminished. "That's a beautiful colt," she said gently. Judah's face flushed red, and he ducked his head. "Just trying to help him walk, ma'am. His leg ain't broke, just tender. He'll be fine with time." His voice was deeper than she'd expected, and despite his obvious nervousness, he spoke with careful precision. This was not the speech of a simple man. "You have a gift with animals," she observed. "Animals don't lie to you," he said quietly, then seemed startled by his own words. I'm sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to speak out of turn." "You didn't," she assured him. "I'm Evelyn Carrington. I've inherited the Lazy Sea Ranch from my late husband." "I heard," Judah said, still not meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." The simple sincerity of his condolence touched her more than all the elaborate expressions of sympathy she'd received from family friends. "Thank you. I'm told you know the area well." "Been here most of my life," he admitted. "And the ranch, do you know it?" For the first time, his eyes met hers directly, and she saw a flicker of something that might have been longing. "It's good land. Water runs clean. Grass grows thick. Your husband was a fortunate man." The way he spoke about the land not as property to be exploited, but as something precious to be cherished, told her everything she needed to know. "Mr. Kane," she said, making a decision that would change both their lives. "I'm in need of a foreman, someone who understands the land and cares about it. Would you be interested in the position?" The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and impossible. Judah's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, hope, fear, and finally a desperate kind of longing that nearly broke her heart. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I don't think you understand. Folks around here, they don't think much of me. Hiring me would cause you trouble." "Let me worry about the trouble," she said firmly. "What I need to know is whether you're willing to work hard and treat the land with respect." "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I surely am." As they shook, Hansher, small, gloved hand, disappearing into his massive, scarred one, Evelyn felt the weight of the moment. She was not just hiring a foreman. She was betting everything on her ability to see worth where others saw only limitation. Neither of them noticed Marcus Bellweather, watching from across the street, his expression dark with calculation and growing anger. Dawn came early at the Lazy Sea Ranch, painting the Colorado sky in shades of rose and gold that took Evelyn's breath away. She stood on the porch of the modest ranch house, coffee steaming in her hands, watching Judah work with the horses in the corral. Even from a distance, she could see the transformation in him. Out here, away from the whispers and stares of town, his shoulders had straightened, and his movements carried a confidence she hadn't seen before. It had been 3 days since she'd hired him, and already the other ranch hands were making their displeasure known. Jake Brennan, the previous foreman, had quit in a rage after learning he'd been replaced by that half-wit giant. 2 other men had followed him, leaving Evelyn with a skeleton crew and Judah bearing the weight of their resentment. "You sure about this, Mrs. Carrington?" asked Tom Garrett, one of the few hands who'd stayed. He was a decent man in his 50s, weathered by years of honest work, but his doubt was written clearly on his face. "Judah's a good worker, don't get me wrong, but managing a spread this size takes more than muscle." "Give him a chance," Evelyn said quietly. "Sometimes people surprise you." What she didn't tell Tom was that Judah had already surprised her. Yesterday, she'd found him in the ranch office studying the account books by lamplight, his massive finger tracing the columns of numbers with careful precision. When she'd asked if he needed help, he'd looked up with embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "Just trying to understand the operation, Ma'am. Want to make sure I'm doing right by you." The books showed a ranch that was profitable but not thriving, held back by conservative management and missed opportunities. In the margins, she'd noticed penciled notes in Judah's careful handwriting observations about cattle rotation, water management, and improvements that could increase efficiency. His suggestions revealed an understanding of ranching that went far beyond what anyone gave him credit for. Now, watching him work with a young colt that had been born with a twisted front leg, she saw that same patient intelligence at work. The veterinarian had recommended putting the animal down, but Judah had asked for permission to try something different. He'd fashioned a simple brace from leather and wood, then spent hours each day helping the colt learn to walk with support. This morning, for the first time, the colt was standing on its own. Evelyn set down her coffee and walked to the corral fence, drawn by the quiet miracle unfolding before her. Judah knelt beside the young horse, his voice low and encouraging as he guided its first tentative steps. The colt wobbled, stumbled, then found its balance and took another step, then another. "Easy now," Judah murmured, his scarred hands steady and sure. "You're stronger than you know. Just got to believe it." The words hung in the morning air, and Evelyn realized he might have been talking to himself as much as to the colt. When the young horse completed a full circuit of the small pen, Judah's face lit up with such pure joy that she felt tears prick her eyes. "Remarkable," she said softly. Judah startled, then ducked his head in embarrassment. "Just took some patience, Ma'am. He wanted to walk just, needed someone to believe he could." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Marcus Bellweather rode into the yard, accompanied by 2 men Evelyn didn't recognize, their expensive suits and soft hands marking them as city folk. The banker's smile was sharp as a blade as he dismounted. "Mrs. Carrington, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I've brought some associates from Denver who are very interested in your property." "I told you, Mr. Bellweather, I'm not selling." Of course. But surely there's no harm in listening to what they have to offer." His eyes flicked to Judah, who had moved protectively closer to Evelyn. "I see you're still employing your charity case. How noble of you." Evelyn felt Judah tense beside her, saw the way his shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow. The casual cruelty of Bellweather's words sparked anger in her chest. "Mr. Kane is my foreman," she said firmly, "and he's doing excellent work." One of the city men laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Foreman? That brute? My dear lady, surely you jest." "I assure you, I do not." Bellweather's smile grew thinner. "Mrs. Carrington, I admire your charitable spirit, but this is a business, not an orphanage. You can't run a successful ranch on good intentions alone." "Then perhaps you should see what good intentions can accomplish," Evelyn replied coolly. She turned to Judah, whose face had gone red with shame and anger. "Mr. Kane, would you show these gentlemen your work with the injured colt?" Judah's eyes went wide with panic. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Please," she said gently, and something in her voice must have reached him because he nodded reluctantly. The next few minutes were a masterclass in quiet expertise. Judah explained the colt's condition with simple clarity, demonstrated the brace he'd designed, and showed how patient therapy had restored the animal's mobility. His knowledge of anatomy, his understanding of healing, and his innovative approach to what others had dismissed as hopeless impressed even the skeptical city men. But Bellweather was far from impressed. If anything, his expression grew darker as Judah spoke. This wasn't the simple-minded brute he'd described to his associates. This was a man of genuine intelligence and skill, and that made him dangerous to Bellweather's plans. "Very touching," the banker said when Judah finished. "But healing a lame horse hardly qualifies one to manage a ranch of this scope. You need someone with business experience, Mrs. Carrington. Someone who understands markets, banking, the complexities of large-scale operations. Someone like you, Mr. Bellweather. I have associates who would be ideal, men of proven ability and social standing." Evelyn studied the banker's face, noting the way his eyes lingered on the ranch buildings, the pastures, the obvious signs of prosperity. There was hunger there, and calculation that made her deeply uneasy. "I appreciate your concern," she said carefully, "but I'm satisfied with my current arrangements." Bellweather's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory beneath his polished exterior. "Mrs. Carrington, you're a refined lady from the East. You don't understand how things work out here. A woman alone, making poor decisions about personnel, trusting the wrong people well, such situations can become quite dangerous." The threat was barely veiled, and Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Beside her, Judah had gone very still, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Bellweather?" "Of course not," the banker said smoothly, his smile returning. "I'm simply pointing out realities. This is rough country, Mrs. Carrington. Accidents happen. Property can be damaged. People can get hurt. It's always better to have the right allies, the right protection." One of the city men cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss this another time, Bellweather. The lady has made her position clear." "Indeed she has," Bellweather agreed, mounting his horse with fluid grace. "But positions can change, Mrs. Carrington. Circumstances have a way of clarifying one's priorities." As the three men rode away, Evelyn found herself trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. The banker's words echoed in her mind. "Accidents happen. People can get hurt." She'd thought she was simply fighting social prejudice, but this felt like something much more dangerous. "Ma'am," Judah said quietly, "maybe he's right. Maybe you'd be better off with someone else." She turned to look at him, this gentle giant who'd been dismissed and diminished his entire life, and felt her resolve crystallize into something unbreakable. "No," she said firmly, "they're wrong about you, Judah. They've always been wrong, and I'll be damned if I let them intimidate either of us into believing their lies." Judah's eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something new, their hope, fragile but growing stronger. The injured colt chose that moment to nuzzle against his shoulder, a living testament to the power of patience and belief. But as they stood there in the morning sunlight, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the hills above the ranch, or the glint of sunlight off a rifle scope trained on the yard below. Bellweather's threat had not been idle, and the stakes of their defiance were about to become terrifyingly clear. The lame colt took another step, stronger now, ready to run. But the storm gathering on the horizon would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The evening sun painted the ranch house walls amber as Evelyn discovered Judah in the small room that served as an office, bent over a piece of wood with a knife in his hand. Shavings curled away from the blade in delicate spirals, and she could see he was carving something with extraordinary care and precision. "I'm sorry," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Judah's face flushed red as he quickly tried to hide his work, but she'd already seen enough to recognize the shape taking form under his careful Hansa-horse, no larger than her palm, but rendered with such detail and life that it seemed ready to gallop from his fingers. "It's beautiful," she said, stepping closer despite his obvious embarrassment. "May I see it?" With reluctance that spoke of years of hiding his talents, Judah held out the small carving, The wooden horse was exquisite, every muscle and line captured with an artist's eye for both anatomy and spirit. It was clearly meant to be the injured colt, but in Judah's vision, the animal ran free and strong, its disability transformed into graceful movement. "You made this?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "It's nothing," he mumbled, "just something to do with my hands in the evenings." Evelyn turned the carving over in her palm, marveling at the craftsmanship. This wasn't the work of an unskilled laborer killing time. This was art, created by someone who saw beauty in the world and had the talent to capture it. "How long have you been carving?" "Since I was a boy. My mama taught me before she died. Said everyone needed something beautiful to hold on to when the world got ugly." The sadness in his voice made her chest tight. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was. Only person who ever thought I might be worth something." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides you, I mean." The simple honesty of his words hit her like a physical blow. How many years had he carried the weight of everyone's dismissal? How many talents had he hidden because showing them would only invite more ridicule? "You should show these to people," she said gently. "They're remarkable." Judah shook his head quickly. "Folks around here don't want to see a man like me making pretty things. They want me hauling freight and busting broncs. Anything else just makes them uncomfortable." Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of raised voices from the bunkhouse drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Tom Garrett in heated discussion with two of the remaining ranch hands, Slim Morrison and Bobby Chen. Even at a distance, the tension was obvious. "I should go," Judah said, starting to rise. "Wait." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his arm. "What aren't you telling me about the men?" Judah's jaw tightened. "They're good workers, Mum. Just taking some time to adjust." "Judah." Her voice carried quiet authority. "I need to know what I'm dealing with." He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the carved horse in her hands. "They don't like taking orders from me. Keep saying Bellweather warned them I'd lead you to ruin. Slim's been talking about quitting, and if he goes, the others might follow." The news wasn't entirely surprising, but it was troubling. The ranch needed every hand it could get, especially with roundup season approaching. But more than that, she could see the weight of responsibility wearing on Judah's shoulders. "What do you think we should do?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Ma'am, you're the foreman. These are your men to manage. What's your recommendation?" Judah straightened slightly, and she saw a flicker of the confidence he showed when working with animals. "Well, I reckon we need to prove ourselves through work, not words. Show them that partnering with us brings results." "How do we do that?" "There's a section of North Pasture that's been underused because of an old rock slide blocking the creek. Been thinking about it, and I believe we could clear it out, get the water flowing again. Would give us another 100 acres of good grazing land." Evelyn studied his face, noting the careful intelligence behind his words. "How long would something like that take?" "Maybe 2 weeks with the full crew working together. But it'd mean everyone pitching in, no one thinking they're too good for hard labor." It was a clever solution: unite the men through shared effort while improving the ranch's productivity. "Make it happen," she said. Over the next several days, Evelyn watched Judah's plan unfold with growing admiration. He worked alongside the men rather than simply directing them, his enormous strength and tireless effort setting a pace that shamed anyone who might consider slacking. When Slim Morrison made a snide comment about following a half-wit into the rocks, Judah didn't respond with anger but with patient competence, demonstrating exactly how to position the charges that would break up the largest boulders. By the third day, even the most skeptical hands had to admit that Judah knew what he was doing. His understanding of water flow, his ability to read the land, and his innovative approaches to seemingly impossible problems slowly won grudging respect. But the real transformation came on Friday evening when Bobby Chen slipped on wet rocks and found himself trapped beneath a fallen stone. It was Judah who organized the rescue, using leverage and careful positioning to free the injured man without causing further harm. As he carried Bobby to safety, his gentleness with the hurt cowboy reminded everyone watching of his work with the injured colt. That night, as Dr. Hayes tended to Bobby's broken ribs, Slim Morrison approached Judah with something that might have been an apology. "Reckon I misjudged you," the older cowboy said gruffly. "Man who saves your hide deserves respect, regardless of what folks in town might say." Judah nodded simply. Just did what needed doing. But Evelyn, watching from the porch, saw how Judah's shoulders straightened a little more, how his voice carried a new note of quiet authority when he discussed the next day's work with the men. Later that evening, she found him back in the office, once again working on a carving. This time, it was a different horse Bobby's mount, a spirited paint with distinctive markings. She realized he was creating a gift for the injured cowboy, something beautiful to mark their growing bond. "They're starting to see you," she said softly. Judah looked up, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Starting to see past what they expected to find. And what about you? Are you starting to see yourself differently?" He was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same care he brought to his carvings. "Maybe. Still feels strange, having folks depend on me for more than just muscle. But it feels right, too, if that makes sense." "Perfect sense," she assured him. "You're becoming the man you were always meant to be." Outside, night settled over the ranch with the promise of tomorrow's challenges. The North Pasture project was nearly complete, and its success would prove to everyone eluding themselves that they were building something that could last. But neither of them could know that Marcus Bellweather was already planning his next move, one that would test their growing partnership in ways neither could imagine. The railroad map spread across Evelyn's kitchen table like a promise and a burden, its carefully inked lines tracing the routes her father had spent decades building. Thomas had kept it in his study, a reminder of the empire he'd inherited through marriage and the responsibilities that came with the Carrington name. Now, studying the network of steel that connected mining towns to market cities, Evelyn felt the weight of expectations that had shaped her entire life. "The Denver and Rio Grande wants to extend this spur line," she explained to Judah, pointing to a section that ran uncomfortably close to her property. "If they do, it would bring cattle buyers right to our doorstep, but it also means we'd need to increase our herd size significantly to make the investment worthwhile." Judah studied the map with the same careful attention he brought to everything, his finger tracing the proposed route. "That's a lot of cattle to support on our current grazing land." "Exactly, which is why the North Pasture project was so important. But even with that additional acreage, we'd need to lease or purchase more land." She paused, looking at the numbers she'd calculated and recalculated. "It's a risk, but it could make us one of the most profitable operations in the territory." What she didn't tell him was that her father's final letter, delivered by the family attorney just before she'd left Philadelphia, had made his expectations clear. The Carrington name meant something in railroad circles, and that something came with obligations. If she couldn't make the ranch profitable enough to justify the investment, other family members were prepared to force a sale. "Your father expects you to succeed," the lawyer had said diplomatically, "but he also expects you to be realistic about your limitations." The unspoken message had been clear: prove yourself worthy of the Carrington legacy, or watch it slip away. A knock at the kitchen door interrupted her brooding. Tom Garrett stood on the porch, hat in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mrs. Carrington, sorry to bother you, but we've got a problem. 3 of our best bulls are missing from the South Pasture." Evelyn felt her stomach drop. The bulls were worth nearly $1,000 collectively, animals she couldn't afford to lose. "Missing how?" "Fence has been cut clean through. Tracks show the animals were driven off, not wandered." Judah was already reaching for his coat. "Rustlers?" "Looks that way. Trail heads toward Bellweather's land, but it's hard to follow in this light." The timing was suspicious, coming just as the ranch was starting to show real progress. Evelyn folded the railroad map with hands that trembled slightly with anger. "How long ago?" "Hard to say. Could have been any time since yesterday evening." As they rode out to examine the scene, Evelyn found herself studying Judah's profile in the lamplight. Over the past weeks, she'd watched him transform from the head-down, shuffling man, she'd first met into someone who carried himself with quiet dignity. The other hands now came to him with questions and problems, trusting his judgment in ways that would have seemed impossible just a month ago. But it was more than professional respect that drew her attention to the strong line of his jaw, or the way his large hands held the reins with surprising grace. She was beginning to recognize feelings she'd thought buried with Thomas, the flutter of awareness when Judah smiled, the way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched. The cut fence told a clear story of deliberate sabotage. The wire had been snipped with tools, not torn by animals, and the tracks showed at least 3 riders working together to drive the bulls toward the eastern boundary of her property. "This is professional work," Tom observed grimly. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Judah knelt beside the tracks, studying them in the lamplight. 3 horses, all shod. One of them favors his left front hoof. You can see the slight drag mark. "If we can find that horse, we can find our rustlers," Evelyn finished. "Can you follow the trail?" "In daylight, yes, ma'am. But Mrs. Carrington," he hesitated, then forged ahead. "This feels personal. Someone's sending you a message." She thought of Bellwether's veiled threats, his talk of accidents, and the need for proper protection. "What kind of message?" "The kind that says you're vulnerable out here, that you need help from the right people." The implications made her feel sick. If Bellwether was behind this, it meant the theft was just the beginning. He would escalate until she was forced to accept his assistance or abandon the ranch entirely. "What do we do?" she asked. Judah was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a new note of steel. "We get your bulls back, and we make sure whoever took them understands that stealing from you comes with consequences." The next morning brought a confrontation that would change everything. They followed the trail to the edge of Bellwether's property, where it conveniently disappeared onto hard ground that showed no tracks. But Judah's keen eye spotted something the rustlers had missed: a distinctive horseshoe print in a muddy creek crossing that matched the limping horse. "That shoe was fitted by Pete McCready," Tom said, studying the mark. "He's the only blacksmith in 50 miles who files them that way." An hour later, they stood in McCready's shop while the nervous blacksmith confirmed their suspicions. The horse belonged to Jake Brennan, Evelyn's former foreman who'd quit in a rage when she'd hired Judah. "He paid me to keep quiet about shoeing that horse," McCready admitted reluctantly, "said it was for a surprise." The surprise, it turned out, was finding her bulls penned in a hidden canyon on public land, guarded by Brennan and 2 men she didn't recognize. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Judah's imposing presence and Tom's drawn rifle discouraged any heroics, and within an hour they were driving the stolen animals back toward home. But Brennan's parting words carried an ominous promise. "This ain't over, you half-wit. Bellwether's got plans for this place, and your fancy lady friend ain't going to stop him." That evening, as they tallied the recovered animals and repaired the damaged fence, Evelyn felt the weight of the railroad map in her pocket. The theft had cost them valuable time and demonstrated just how vulnerable they were to sabotage. If Bellwether was willing to resort to rustling, what would he try next? "You're thinking hard about something," Judah observed as they walked back toward the house. "The railroad expansion," she admitted. "It could save us, but it also makes us a bigger target. Bellwether wants this land, and he's not going to give up just because we caught his men stealing cattle." Judah stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the lamplight. "Mrs. Carrington, Evelyn, I need you to know something. Whatever comes next, I'm not going anywhere. You took a chance on me when nobody else would, and I won't let you face this alone." The way he said her name, soft and careful as if it was something precious, made her heart skip. For a moment, the practical concerns of railroads and rustlers faded, replaced by an awareness of the man standing before her, strong, loyal, and looking at her with something that might have been love. "Judah," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the feelings growing in her chest. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I'm not the kind of man you're supposed to, that folks would expect. But if things were different—" "Things are different," she said firmly. "We're making them different, one day at a time." In the distance, the lights of Silver Spur twinkled like fallen stars, and somewhere among them, Marcus Bellweather was planning his next move. But for now, in the quiet space between evening and night, two people who'd been dismissed by the world had found something worth fighting for in each other. The midnight lantern cast dancing shadows across the sick pen as Evelyn and Judah worked side by side, fighting to save the lives of animals that meant the difference between prosperity and ruin. The anthrax outbreak had struck without warning, claiming 6 head of cattle in 2 days and threatening to spread through the entire herd. "Temperature's still climbing," Evelyn said, pressing the back of her hand to a heifer's fevered forehead. The animal's breathing was labored, her eyes dull with pain and exhaustion. Judah carefully measured another dose of the medicine Dr. Hayes had provided, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he administered the treatment. "Doc says we should see improvement by morning if the medicine's going to work." They'd been taking shifts through the night, monitoring the sick animals and dosing them every 4 hours. It was exhausting work, made more difficult by the constant fear that one moment of carelessness could spread the disease to healthy cattle. But somewhere in the long hours of shared effort, the careful discussions of symptoms and treatments, something had shifted between them. "My father would be horrified," Evelyn said quietly, settling into the straw beside a resting calf. His daughter playing veterinarian in a cattle pen at midnight. Judah looked up from the medication he was preparing. "What would he want you to be doing instead?" "Hosting dinner parties, attending the opera, marrying well and producing grandchildren for him to show off to his business associates." She laughed softly, but there was little humor in it. "He never understood why I preferred reading about animal husbandry to reading poetry." "Sounds lonely," Judah observed. The simple understanding in his voice touched something deep in her chest. It was. "I spent most of my childhood with tutors and governesses, learning to be the perfect railroad heiress. Thomas was the first person who ever asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I should want." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the lantern light creating an intimate circle in the vast darkness of the Colorado night. When the young heifer finally showed signs of improvement, cooler temperature, clearer eyes, Evelyn felt tears of relief threaten to spill over. "She's going to make it," she whispered. Judah's smile was gentle in the lamplight. "You saved her. Your quick thinking to isolate the sick animals probably saved the whole herd." "We saved her," Evelyn corrected. "I couldn't have done this alone." As dawn painted the eastern sky pink and gold, they finally allowed themselves to rest on the porch of the ranch house, sharing coffee and the quiet satisfaction of crisis weathered together. The sick animals were stable, the outbreak contained, and they had proven once again that they made a formidable team. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said, watching Judah's profile in the early light. "Anything. What did you dream of being when you were young, before everyone told you what you were supposed to be?" Judah was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of buried hopes. "I wanted to be a teacher," he said quietly. "Read every book I could get my hands on, practiced writing in the dirt when nobody was watching. Thought maybe someday I could help other kids learn to read, show them that books could take you anywhere you wanted to go." The image of Judah in a schoolroom, his patient hands helping a child sound out words, was so vivid and right that it made her heart ache. "What stopped you?" "Reality," he said simply. "Who's going to trust their children to a man they think is simple? Better to accept what folks expect and find what satisfaction you can in honest work." Evelyn thought of all the intelligence she'd witnessed in him, his innovative solutions to ranch problems, his understanding of animal behavior, his artistic talent with the carvings. How many other people had the world dismissed before they could show their true worth? "It's not too late," she said softly. Judah shook his head with a sad smile. "I'm 32 years old, Evelyn. That dream belongs to a different life." Before she could argue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their quiet moment. Marcus Bellweather rode into the yard with an entourage that included Mayor Caldwell, Dr. Hayes, and several men she didn't recognize. The banker's expression was one of false concern mixed with barely concealed satisfaction. "Mrs. Carrington," Bellweather called out, dismounting with theatrical urgency. "We heard about the outbreak. Terrible business, simply terrible. How many head have you lost?" "6," she replied carefully, not liking the gleam in his eyes. "6 so far," he corrected. "Anthrax is a devastating disease, Mrs. Carrington. It can wipe out an entire herd in a matter of days. The whole territory could be at risk." Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his expression genuinely troubled. "Mrs. Carrington, I have to ask, have you considered the possibility that this outbreak wasn't natural?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" "Anthrax can be introduced deliberately," one of the strangers said. He was a thin man with intelligent eyes who introduced himself as a territorial health inspector. "We've seen cases where diseased animals were introduced to healthy herds, either through malice or carelessness." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. The theft of her bulls, now a suspicious disease outbreak, the pattern was becoming clear and terrifying. Bellweather's voice was smooth as silk. "Of course, we're not suggesting any wrongdoing on your part, Mrs. Carrington, but the territorial government has to consider quarantine measures for the protection of everyone in the area. Quarantine measures, restriction of cattle movement, suspension of sales, possible destruction of affected herds," the inspector explained. "Standard procedures to prevent spread." The words hit her like hammer blows. Without the ability to sell cattle, the ranch would be bankrupt within months. Everything she and Judah had worked for would be destroyed. "But the outbreak is contained," she protested. "We've isolated the sick animals, treated them successfully." "According to your foreman," Bellweather interrupted with a meaningful glance at Judah. "But is that really sufficient expertise for such a serious situation? Perhaps it would be better to have more qualified individuals assess the situation." The insult was clear, and Evelyn saw Judah's hands clench into fists. But when he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "The animals are responding to treatment. Temperatures down, appetites returning. Dr. Hayes can confirm the improvement." Dr. Hayes nodded reluctantly. "That's true, but anthrax is unpredictable. Even animals that seem to recover can relapse without warning. Which is why," Bellweather said, moving in for the kill, "it might be wise to consider other options. I know several established ranchers who would be willing to purchase your remaining healthy cattle at fair market prices. It would allow you to exit the business before the situation becomes truly catastrophic." There, it was the trap closing around them. Create a crisis, offer a solution that served his purposes, and pressure her to accept before she had time to think clearly. "That's very generous," she said slowly, "but I believe we can handle the situation." "Can you?" Bellweather's mask slipped slightly, revealing the predator beneath. "Mrs. Carrington, you're an inexperienced woman relying on an questionable foreman. How many more disasters can your operation survive?" The threat was barely veiled, and Evelyn realized with crystal clarity that the anthrax outbreak was no accident. Someone had deliberately introduced disease to her cattle, gambling that she would panic and sell rather than fight. "Mr. Bellweather," she said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest, "I appreciate your concern, but I'll make my own decisions about my property." The banker's smile was sharp as a blade. "Of course, but decisions have consequences, Mrs. Carrington. I do hope you're prepared for whatever those might be." As the group rode away, Evelyn stood beside Judah in the morning light, both of them understanding that the gloves had finally come off. Bellweather was done with subtle pressure and veiled threats. The real war for the ranch was about to begin. The broken locket lay in Judah's palm like a fragment of a shattered dream, its tarnished silver catching the firelight in the ranch house parlor. Evelyn watched his face as he stared at the single photograph visible through the cracked glass, a young woman with gentle eyes and Judah's same strong jawline. "She was 19 when this was taken," he said quietly, "already carrying me, though you can't tell from the picture. Her name was Sarah, and she had the kindest heart of anyone I've ever known." They were alone in the house, the evening meal finished, and the hands settled in the bunkhouse. The anthrax crisis had passed, but its aftermath had drawn them closer together, shared danger, creating an intimacy that neither quite knew how to navigate. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said softly, settling beside him on the worn sofa. Judah's thumb traced the locket's edge with reverent care. She found beauty in everything: wildflowers, sunset clouds, even the sound of rain on the roof. "Used to say that God painted something new every day for folks who bothered to look." His voice carried a pain so deep that Evelyn felt it in her own chest. "What happened to her?" "Fever took her when I was 12. Same sickness that comes through every few years and claims the weak. She fought it for weeks, kept telling me she'd get better, that we'd take that trip to see the ocean like she'd always promised." He paused, his jaw working with emotion. "Last thing she said was to remember that I was worth loving, no matter what anybody else might say." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at the image of a dying woman using her final breath to protect her son from the cruelty of the world. "And your father?" Judah's expression hardened. "Started drinking heavy after the funeral. Blamed me for taking her away. Said if she hadn't had to worry about caring for a simple boy, she might have had strength to fight the fever." He closed the locket with a gentle click. "Left when I was 14, just rode out one morning and never came back." The casual brutality of abandoning a grieving child took Evelyn's breath away. "Oh, Judah." "Folks said he was probably right," he continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Said maybe she would have lived if she hadn't had me to worry about. After a while I started believing it too." Evelyn reached out and covered his hands with both of hers, the broken locket nestled between their palms. "Your mother died of fever, not heartbreak. And if she'd lived to see the man you've become, she would have been so proud." Judah looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "Sometimes when you look at me like that, I almost believe it." The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Evelyn was acutely aware of his warmth, the strength in his hands, the way his breath caught when she leaned slightly closer. "Judah," she whispered, and the rest of her words were lost as his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he couldn't quite believe she wanted this too. But when she responded, her hands sliding up to cup his face, something ignited between them. Years of loneliness and dismissal fell away as they discovered in each other what they'd both been missing: acceptance, desire, and the thrilling possibility of being truly known. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Judah's eyes were wide with wonder and something that might have been fear. "I shouldn't have," he began. "Yes, you should have," Evelyn interrupted firmly. "I've been wanting you to do that for weeks." "Evelyn, you don't understand. People like me don't end up with people like you. It's not how the world works." She studied his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his words. This was a man who'd been taught his entire life that he wasn't worthy of love, that dreams of happiness belonged to other people. "What if we make our own world?" she said softly. "What if we decide how things work?" Before he could answer, the sound of approaching horses shattered the intimate moment. They sprang apart as heavy footsteps stomped onto the porch, followed by urgent knocking. Tom Garrett's voice called through the door. "Mrs. Carrington, we got trouble." Evelyn smoothed her hair and opened the door to find Tom standing with hat in hand, his weathered face grim with worry. "What is it?" "Telegram from Denver," he said, holding out a yellow envelope. "Come from your late husband's family." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she read the message. The words were polite, but their meaning was clear. Thomas's uncle, who held significant influence over the family trust, was questioning her ability to manage the ranch profitably. If she couldn't demonstrate substantial improvement in the operation's finances within 60 days, the family would be forced to consider selling the property to more capable hands. "They're forcing my hand," she said quietly, sinking into a chair. 60 days to prove the ranch is profitable, or they'll sell it out from under me." Judah read over her shoulder, his expression darkening. "This isn't coincidence. Bellweather's been in contact with them." "But how could he?" She stopped, realizing the answer. Marcus Bellweather moved in railroad and banking circles. It would be simple enough for him to reach out to the Carrington family trust, express concern about her judgment, suggest that they needed to protect their investment. "He's been planning this from the beginning," she said with growing certainty. "The theft, the anthrax outbreak, the pressure about my management choices, it's all been designed to make me look incompetent." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, there's more. Word around town is that Bellweather's been spreading stories about you and—" He glanced at Judah with obvious discomfort. "About improper relationships and poor judgment." The implication hit her like a slap. In a society where a woman's reputation was her most valuable asset, rumors of inappropriate conduct with a man considered beneath her station could destroy her credibility completely. "Let them talk," Judah said quietly, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "You don't need this kind of trouble." "Don't you dare," Evelyn said fiercely. "Don't you dare let them make you think you're not worthy of love." "It's not about worthy," he replied with devastating gentleness. "It's about protecting you from the consequences of caring about me." The fear in his voice broke her heart. This was exactly what Bellweather had been counting on, that social pressure would drive them apart, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. "Judah Kane," she said, standing to face him directly. "I've spent my entire life living according to other people's expectations. I've been the dutiful daughter, the proper wife, the respectable widow. And where has it gotten me? Surrounded by people who want to control me, use me, or dismiss me." She reached out and took his hands, broken locket and all. "You see me, not my father's money or my husband's name, but me. And I see you, your intelligence, your kindness, your strength. If that's improper, then I choose to be improper." Tom cleared his throat diplomatically. "Ma'am, what do you want me to tell the men about the telegram?" "Tell them we have 60 days to save this ranch," she said firmly, "and we're going to do it." As Tom departed and they were alone again, Judah studied her face in the lamplight. "This is going to get ugly, Evelyn. Bellweather won't stop with rumors." "I know," she said simply, "but some things are worth fighting for." She thought of the broken locket in his palm, of a dying woman's promise that her son was worth loving. Perhaps it was time to prove that some promises could be kept, even years later. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and somewhere in town, Marcus Bellweather was already planning his next move. But in the quiet sanctuary of the ranch house, two people who'd been dismissed by the world held onto each other and dared to believe that love might be stronger than the forces arrayed against them. The hidden will lay spread across the kitchen table like an accusation, its legal language dense and forbidding in the lamplight. Evelyn stared at the document that changed everything, her hands trembling as she read Thomas's secret provisions for the third time. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would he hide this?" Judge Morrison, Tom's older brother who served as the territorial magistrate, adjusted his spectacles with weathered fingers. "From what I can piece together, your husband was trying to protect you. These gambling debts, the loans against the ranch's future earnings, she got in deep with some dangerous people." The numbers swimming before Evelyn's eyes told a devastating story. Thomas, her gentle husband who'd spoken so lovingly of their shared future, had been secretly wagering enormous sums on railroad speculation and mining ventures. The debts totaled nearly $40,000, more than the ranch could earn in 5 years of profitable operation. Marcus Bellweather holds most of these notes. Judge Morrison continued grimly. "According to this document, if the debts aren't satisfied within 1 year of Thomas's death, ownership of the ranch reverts to the creditors." Judah, who'd been silent through the judge's explanation, finally spoke. "When does the year end?" "October 15th, the judge replied. 6 weeks from now." The trap was even more elegant than Evelyn had realized. Bellweather hadn't just been pressuring her to sell, he'd been counting down to a date when the ranch would legally become his property. Every delay, every crisis he'd manufactured, had been designed to prevent her from generating the income needed to pay Thomas's debts. "There's more," Judge Morrison said reluctantly. He pulled out another document, this one yellowed with age and bearing an official territorial seal. "This is why Bellweather was so determined to get you off the land quickly. He's been hiding something important. The document was a land grant from 1847, written in careful script and bearing the signature of the territorial governor. As Evelyn read, she felt the blood drain from her face. "Judah," she said quietly, "what was your grandfather's name?" "Ezra Kane." "Why?" "Because according to this, Ezra Kane was granted mineral rights to 2,000 acres that include most of this ranch, rights that were supposed to pass to his heirs." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Judah stared at the document as if it might disappear if he looked away. "That's impossible," he said finally. "My grandfather was just a drifter, worked other people's land his whole life." Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Son, your grandfather filed this claim in 1847 after serving as a guide for a territorial surveying expedition. The land was his by right, but someone convinced him to sell the surface rights while keeping the mineral claims. Problem is, the mineral rights were never properly transferred when the surface land changed hands." "What does that mean?" Evelyn asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would change everything. "It means," the judge said carefully, "that legally speaking, Judah Kane owns the mineral rights to most of this ranch, including the silver deposits that were discovered last year." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. The silver mine that had brought prosperity to Silver Spur, the mineral wealth that made the land so valuable or legally, belonged to the man the entire town dismissed as worthless. "Bellweather knows," Evelyn said with sudden certainty. "That's why he's been so desperate to get control of the land. He's been mining silver that doesn't belong to him." Judge Morrison nodded grimly. "Near as I can figure, he discovered the mineral rights issue while researching your husband's debts. Instead of revealing the truth, he decided to use Thomas's gambling problems to force you off the land. Once he had clear title, he could claim the mineral rights by adverse possession." Judah was staring at the document with an expression of stunned disbelief. "You're telling me that I own approximately $2 million worth of silver deposits?" The judge confirmed. "Maybe more. The mine's been producing for 18 months, and every ounce extracted from your grandfather's claim belongs to you." The irony was almost too bitter to comprehend. The man everyone called worthless was actually one of the wealthiest individuals in the territory. The simple giant who'd been dismissed and diminished his entire life owned more than most men could dream of. "Why didn't anyone know?" Evelyn asked. "How could this have been hidden for so long?" "Records were scattered during the territorial reorganization in the 1850s, Judge Morrison explained. "Plus, your grandfather couldn't read well, and the lawyer who handled the original transaction died in the cholera outbreak of 1849. The paperwork ended up in a forgotten file in the territorial capital." "Then how did you find it?" The judge's expression grew troubled. "I didn't. Someone brought it to me 3 days ago, said they'd been holding onto it for years, waiting for the right time to reveal the truth." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. "Who?" Before Judge Morrison could answer, the kitchen door burst open and Dr. Hayes stumbled in, his usually neat appearance disheveled and his face pale with fear. "They're coming," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Bellweather and a dozen armed men. Said they're here to serve eviction papers and remove squatters from his property." The sound of approaching horses confirmed his words. Through the window, Evelyn could see torches bobbing in the darkness as riders surrounded the ranch house. "It's too convenient," Judah said suddenly, his voice tight with suspicion. "The timing of finding these documents, just when we needed them most." Judge Morrison's face crumpled with guilt. "Son, there's something else you need to know. The person who brought me these papers was your father." The words hit Judah like a physical blow. "My father's dead." "No, he's not. He's been living in Denver under another name, working as a clerk for the Territorial Land Office. That's how he found the records. He's been watching you from a distance, following your life, waiting for a chance to make amends." Evelyn saw Judah's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been hope. The father who'd abandoned him, who'd blamed him for his mother's death, had been alive all these years. And now, when everything hung in the balance, he'd chosen to reveal the truth that could save them. "Why now?" Judah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because he's dying," Judge Morrison said gently. "Consumption. He's got maybe weeks left, and he wanted to give you back what was taken from you. Said it was the only way he could think of to say he was sorry." The sound of boots on the porch interrupted them. Marcus Bellweather's voice called out with false authority. "Mrs. Carrington, by order of the Territorial Court, you are hereby notified that this property is subject to immediate foreclosure. You have 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises." Evelyn looked at Judah, saw the war of emotions playing across his face. In the space of minutes, he'd learned that he was wealthy beyond imagining, that his father was alive but dying, and that the property they'd fought so hard to save might legally be his anyway. "What do we do?" she asked quietly. Judah straightened to his full height, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked like what he truly was, a man of substance and power who'd finally discovered his worth. "We tell them the truth," he said firmly, "and we fight for what's ours." Judge Morrison gathered the documents with careful hands. "These papers will hold up in court, but Bellweather's not going to give up easily. A man doesn't invest 18 months in a scheme like this without being prepared for setbacks." "Then we'll be ready for him," Evelyn said, taking Judah's hand. The scarred knuckles that had once symbolized his brutal life now felt like links to something precious mineral wealth that could secure their future and prove once and for all that worth wasn't determined by birth or circumstances. Outside, Bellweather was growing impatient. "1 hour, Mrs. Carrington, then we come in after you." Judah squeezed her hand gently. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been ready my whole life," she replied. "I just didn't know it until now." As they prepared to face the confrontation that would determine their fate, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the hills above the ranch, an older man with Judah's build and his mother's gentle eyes, come to witness the moment when his son finally claimed his rightful place in the world. The grandfather's deed felt like a piece of history in Judah's hands, its edges worn soft by decades, but its meaning crystal clear in the lamplight of the ranch house parlor. Judge Morrison had authenticated the document's age and legitimacy, confirming that Ezra Kane's claim to the mineral rights was legal and binding under territorial law. "Your grandfather was smarter than anyone gave him credit for," the judge explained, pointing to specific clauses in the original agreement. "He sold the surface rights but retained mineral claims in perpetuity for his heirs. The language is ironclad. Whoever controls this land can farm it, graze cattle on it, even build on it. But anything that comes out of the ground belongs to the Kane family." Outside, they could hear Bellweather's men positioning themselves around the ranch house. Torches flickered in the darkness as armed riders formed a perimeter, their weapons glinting in the firelight. The banker himself sat his horse like a general preparing for siege, his voice carrying across the yard with false authority. "Mrs. Carrington, your time is running out. I have legal papers requiring your immediate removal from this property." Evelyn stood at the window, watching the intimidation display with a mixture of anger and calculation. "How many men does he have?" Tom Garrett, who'd arrived with Judge Morrison, counted carefully. "Dozen, maybe 15. Most of them are hired guns from Denver, not local boys. Bellweather's not taking any chances." "What about our people?" "Slim and Bobby are in the bunkhouse with 3 of the newer hands. They're good men, but they're not gunfighters." Judah was studying the deed with the same careful attention he brought to everything important. "Judge, what exactly does this document mean in practical terms? Can Bellweather still claim the ranch through Thomas's debts?" "That's the beauty of it," Judge Morrison replied. "The mineral rights are separate from the surface property. Even if Bellweather somehow gained title to the ranch through foreclosure, he'd still have to pay you for every ounce of silver extracted from your grandfather's claim. At current prices, that's enough to pay off your late husband's debts 10 times over." The implications were staggering. Not only could they save the ranch, but Judah would emerge from this crisis as one of the wealthiest men in the territory. The dramatic reversal of fortune seemed almost too good to be true. "There's something else," Dr. Hayes said quietly. He'd been unusually subdued since delivering his warning about Bellweather's approach. "Something I should have told you earlier." Evelyn turned from the window. "What is it?" "The anthrax outbreak, I know how it started. Marcus brought me a sick calf 3 weeks ago, said he'd found it wandering on public land and wanted me to examine it. Asked me to keep it quiet because he didn't want to cause a panic." The admission hung in the air like an accusation. Judah's jaw tightened as the full scope of Bellweather's manipulation became clear. "You examined a diseased animal and didn't report it." "I thought I was being discreet," Dr. Hayes said miserably. "Marcus convinced me it was just a mild case, nothing to worry about. But now I realize he was using me to introduce anthrax to your herd. The timing, the placement of the sick calf near your pasturage was all planned." Evelyn felt fury rise in her chest. The man had deliberately infected her cattle, risked not just her livelihood but the health of every animal in the territory, all to serve his greed. "That's attempted destruction of property at minimum," Judge Morrison said grimly. "Probably conspiracy to commit fraud. If we can prove it in court, Bellweather's looking at serious prison time." "First, we have to survive the night," Tom observed. "Legal documents won't stop bullets." Judah carefully folded the deed and tucked it inside his shirt, close to his heart. "Then we need to be smart about this. Bellweather's got numbers, but we've got something he doesn't expect." "What's that?" "The truth." Judah moved to the window, studying the deployment of armed men around the property. "He's counting on intimidation to force us out before anyone realizes what's really at stake. But if we can expose his scheme publicly, the town will turn against him," Evelyn finished. "He's built his reputation on being a respectable businessman. If people learn he's been stealing mineral rights and deliberately spreading disease, he'll lose everything." A new voice called from the darkness outside, not Bellweather this time, but someone with a rougher, more desperate edge. "Kane! Judah Kane! Come out here and face me like a man." Judah's expression darkened as he recognized the voice. "Jake Brennan." "Your old foreman," Tom confirmed. "Sounds like he's been drinking." "Heard you think you're something special now," Brennan shouted. "Heard you got yourself some fancy papers and a rich woman's attention. Well, I got news for you. You big dummy papers don't change what you are." Evelyn saw Judah's hands clench into fists, watched the old shame and anger war with his newfound confidence. This was exactly what Bellweather had counted on, that even with legal proof of his worth, Judah would crumble under the weight of a lifetime's conditioning. "Don't listen to him," she said firmly, placing her hand on Judah's arm. "He's trying to provoke you into doing something foolish." "I know," Judah replied, but she could hear the strain in his voice. "Doesn't make it any easier to ignore." Judge Morrison gathered the legal documents with careful hands. "These papers need to get to the territorial capital for official registration. If something happens here tonight, Bellweather could claim they were forgeries." "I'll take them," Dr. Hayes volunteered. "It's the least I can do after my part in this mess. I can reach Fort Collins by morning, file them with the territorial clerk." "Too dangerous," Tom protested. "Bellweather's got men watching all the roads." "Then we create a distraction," Judah said quietly. "Draw their attention while Dr. Hayes slips away." Evelyn studied his profile in the lamplight, noting the new authority in his bearing. This was no longer the head-down, shuffling man she'd first met. This was someone who'd finally understood his own worth and was prepared to fight for it. "What kind of distraction?" Before Judah could answer, another voice called from the yard, this one, older, shakier, but carrying a note of desperate determination. "Judah, son, I know you can hear me." The words hit Judah like a physical blow. His face went white as he recognized the voice he'd thought never to hear again. "Father," he whispered. Through the window, they could see a figure on horseback at the edge of the torch, light and older man who bore a striking resemblance to Judah, despite his gaunt frame and obvious illness. Even at a distance, his coughing was audible. "I brought those papers to the judge," the man called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Wanted to give you back what was rightfully yours. Wanted to say I was sorry for the things I said, the way I left you." Bellweather's voice cut through the night air like a blade. "Get that old fool out of here. This is private business." "This is my son's land," Judah's father replied, with more strength than his frail body seemed to possess. "And I'll be damned if I let you steal what his grandfather died protecting." The confrontation was escalating rapidly. Evelyn could see Bellweather's men growing restless, weapons at the ready. The banker himself was clearly losing patience with obstacles to his plan. "Judah," she said urgently, "we need to end this before someone gets killed." He nodded slowly, his expression resolved. "Judge, how long do you need to prepare an official statement about the mineral rights?" 20 minutes to draft something that will hold up in court." "Dr. Hayes, can you reach Fort Collins in 3 hours if you leave now?" "If I take the mountain trail and push hard, yes." "Then here's what we're going to do." Judah's voice carried quiet authority as he outlined his plan. "I'm going out there to face Bellweather directly. Public confrontation, with witnesses. Make him admit what he's done in front of everyone. While I've got his attention, Dr. Hayes takes the back trail to Fort Collins." "That's incredibly dangerous," Evelyn protested. "He's got a dozen armed men." "But he can't shoot me in front of witnesses without destroying his reputation completely. And if I can get him angry enough, he might say something that proves his guilt." Tom nodded slowly. "It could work. Bellweather's always been too proud of his own cleverness. He might not be able to resist bragging about how he outsmarted everyone." Judge Morrison was already drafting the legal statement, his pen scratching rapidly across paper. "This is your choice, son, but I want you to understand the risks. If this goes wrong, at least the truth will survive," Judah replied. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes soft in the lamplight. "There's something I need to say, in case I don't get another chance." "Don't," she said firmly. "You're coming back to me, Judah Kane. We're going to build that life we talked about." He smiled, the expression transforming his face completely. "Yes, ma'am. But first, I'm going to show this town what a Kane is really worth." As he prepared to walk out into the torchlit yard to face the men who'd dismissed him his entire life, Judah touched the deed over his heart one more time. His grandfather's legacy, his father's belated gift, and Evelyn's unwavering faith had given him something he'd never possessed before the absolute certainty of his own worth. The confrontation that would determine their future was about to begin, and for the first time in his life, Judah Kane was ready to stand tall and claim what was rightfully his. The Silver Spur town bell cut through the night air like a call to judgment, its bronze voice carrying across the darkness to wake every soul in Silver Spur. Tom Garrett had ridden hard to reach the church steeple, pulling the rope with desperate urgency as Judah's plan unfolded in the ranch yard below. The bell's meaning was unmistakable emergency, danger, community crisis. Within minutes, lights began appearing in town windows as people stumbled from their beds to investigate. The sound would draw witnesses, exactly as Judah had hoped, forcing Bellweather to play his hand in front of the entire community. Judah stepped through the ranch house door, with his shoulders squared and his head high, the grandfather's deed secure against his chest. The transformation from the cowering giant of just months ago was so complete that several of Bellweather's hired guns shifted nervously in their saddles. This was not the simple-minded brute they'd expected to intimidate. "Bellweather," Judah called out, his voice carrying across the yard with new authority. "Let's settle this like civilized men." The banker sat his horse at the center of his armed circle, torchlight playing across his sharp features. His smile was predatory, but Evelyn caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The bell's summons had disrupted his carefully planned intimidation, and the arrival of townspeople was already complicating his strategy. "There's nothing to settle, Kane," Bellweather replied. "Mrs. Carrington has defaulted on her debts, and this property now belongs to my associates. You're all trespassing." "Is that what you call it?" Judah's voice remained calm, but it carried across the yard with surprising strength. "Seems to me there's another word for taking something that doesn't belong to you." The first wagon from town was already visible on the road, its lantern bobbing as Mayor Caldwell and several other prominent citizens hurried toward the commotion. More were following, shop owners, ranch hands, even Mrs. Henderson, with her ever-present disapproval etched on her weathered face. "You always were too stupid to understand business, Kane," Bellweather said, raising his voice for the gathering crowd. "Some people are born to own land, others are born to work it. Nature puts everyone in their proper place." "And where does nature put thieves and swindlers?" Judah asked quietly. The insult struck home. Bellweather's face flushed with anger, and his careful control began to slip. "You dare accuse me? I accuse you of deliberately infecting Mrs. Carrington's cattle with anthrax," Judah said, his voice carrying clearly to every witness. "I accuse you of hiring men to steal her livestock, and I accuse you of mining silver that belongs to someone else." A murmur ran through the growing crowd. Dr. Hayes, who had emerged from the house during the confrontation, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "It's true about the anthrax," he admitted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Marcus brought me a diseased calf, asked me to examine it quietly. I realize now he was using me to spread infection to the lazy sea herd." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembled townspeople. Marcus Bellweather, their respected banker and pillar of the community, accused of deliberate sabotage and livestock terrorism. "That's ridiculous," Bellweather protested, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Dr. Hayes is obviously mistaken about my intentions." "Then explain this," Judge Morrison said, emerging from the house with the grandfather's deed held high. "Legal proof that the mineral rights to this land belong to Ezra Kane's heir, namely Judah Kane here." The judge's voice carried the authority of territorial law as he continued. "Every ounce of silver extracted from this property for the past 18 months legally belongs to Mr. Kane. That makes Marcus Bellweather guilty of theft on a scale that would make Jesse James jealous." The crowd erupted in astonished murmurs. Judah Kane, the man they'd dismissed as simple, worthless, good for nothing but manual labor, was suddenly revealed as the rightful owner of the territory's most valuable silver deposits. "This is preposterous," Bellweather snarled, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Those documents are obvious forgeries. Territorial seal, proper signatures, authenticated by 3 different legal authorities," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Unless you're calling the territorial governor a liar?" Mayor Caldwell stepped forward, his usual political caution overwhelmed by the magnitude of the accusations. "Marcus, is this true? Have you been mining silver that belongs to someone else?" For the first time since Evelyn had known him, Marcus Bellweather looked genuinely cornered. His hired guns were shifting uncomfortably as the crowd of townspeople grew larger and more hostile. What had been planned as a simple intimidation had turned into a public trial with the entire community as jury. "You don't understand," Bellweather said desperately. "That half-wit couldn't manage a fortune like this. The silver deposits need proper development, professional management. So you decided to steal them." Evelyn's voice cut through the night air as she stepped beside Judah. "You decided that Judah wasn't worthy of his own inheritance?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and suddenly every person in that crowd was thinking about their own treatment of Judah Kane. How many of them had dismissed him, mocked him, treated him as less than human? How many had participated in the cruelty that Bellweather had exploited? Judah's father, still mounted at the edge of the torchlight, coughed violently before speaking. "My boy's grandfather died protecting that claim. Died believing his family would prosper from his sacrifice. I won't let you steal that legacy." The emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. Here was a dying man seeking redemption, a son discovering his true worth, and a community forced to confront its own prejudices. Bellweather's composure finally cracked completely. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "You think money makes that brute any less of what he is? Blood tells, Kane. Your grandfather was a worthless drifter. Your father abandoned you, and you're nothing but a simple-minded giant who got lucky." The cruel words echoed across the yard, and for a moment Evelyn feared they might break Judah's newfound confidence. But when she looked at his face, she saw something magnificent, a man who finally understood that other people's opinions could not diminish his inherent worth. "You're right about one thing," Judah said quietly, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Blood tells. My grandfather's blood tells of a man who earned his place through honest work. My mother's blood tells of someone who loved unconditionally. And maybe even my father's blood tells of someone who finally found the courage to do what's right." He paused, looking around at the faces surrounding them, some hostile, some curious, but all finally seeing him as a person worthy of attention. "As for me," Judah continued, "my blood tells of someone who's never stolen, never cheated, never hurt anyone weaker than himself. Can you say the same, Bellweather?" The truth hit Marcus Bellweather like a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of his carefully constructed facade. Faced with undeniable evidence and surrounded by hostile witnesses, his desperation transformed into something ugly and dangerous. "You want the truth," he snarled, drawing a pistol from his coat. "The truth is that I've spent 2 years building this operation, investing everything I had in developing those silver deposits. I'm not going to let some legal technicality destroy my life's work." Gasps echoed through the crowd as people scrambled backward, but Judah remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Bellweather's face. This was the moment they'd all been building toward, the final confrontation between truth and corruption. "Marcus, put that gun down," Mayor Caldwell called out, his voice shaking. "This isn't the way civilized people settle disputes." "Civilized?" Bellweather laughed bitterly. "There's nothing civilized about watching an imbecile inherit a fortune while better men struggle for scraps. Nature intended that silver for someone with the intelligence to develop it properly." Judge Morrison stepped forward carefully, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Son, you're making this worse for yourself. Put down the weapon and we can work something out in court." "Court?" Bellweather's eyes were wild now, reflecting the torchlight like a cornered animal's. "You think any court will side with a half-wit over an established businessman? I've got friends in Denver, connections in the territorial government. One word from me and those papers disappear forever." "Is that a confession?" Dr. Hayes asked quietly. "Are you admitting to conspiracy to defraud?" The question seemed to penetrate Bellweather's rage-fueled haze. He looked around at the circle of witnesses, realizing for the first time that he'd been speaking freely in front of the entire town. His reputation, his carefully maintained image of respectability, lay in ruins at his feet. "None of you understand," he said desperately. "The investments I've made, the debts I've incurred developing that. If I lose control now, I'll be ruined. My family will be destroyed. Like you tried to destroy mine?" Evelyn stepped beside Judah, her voice steady despite the gun pointed in their direction. "Like you destroyed my cattle, my reputation, my husband's memory with your schemes." "Your husband was a weak fool who gambled away everything you held dear," Bellweather spat. "I was trying to save you from his mistakes." "By stealing from us," Judah said quietly. "By lying, cheating, and threatening violence against anyone who stood in your way." The banker's gun hand was trembling now, sweat beading on his forehead as he faced the collapse of everything he'd worked for. Around them, the townspeople pressed closer, their initial fear giving way to anger as they fully grasped the scope of his betrayal. "Marcus Bellweather," Judge Morrison said formally, "by the authority vested in me by the territorial government, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, destruction of property, and theft of mineral rights. Put down your weapon and surrender yourself for trial." "No," Bellweather whispered, then louder. "No, I won't let 20 years of work be destroyed by legal technicalities and hurt feelings." He raised the pistol toward Judah, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a rifle shot cracked across the yard from an unexpected direction. Bellweather cried out as the bullet knocked the gun from his hand, leaving him clutching wounded fingers. From the darkness at the edge of the torchlight, Judah's father emerged on horseback, a smoking rifle in his hands. Despite his obvious illness, his aim had been true. "Nobody threatens my son," the older man said simply, then dissolved into a fit of violent coughing that nearly toppled him from his saddle. The drama of the moment was broken by the arrival of territorial marshals summoned by Dr. Hayes during his ride to Fort Collins. The physician had indeed made record time, filing the mineral rights documents and returning with official law enforcement. "Marcus Bellweather," the lead marshal announced, "you're under arrest for multiple violations of territorial law. Your associates are advised to surrender their weapons and submit to questioning." The hired guns, faced with legitimate law enforcement and an increasingly hostile crowd, wisely chose not to resist. Within minutes, Bellweather and his entire operation were in custody, their carefully planned intimidation transformed into complete defeat. As the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport to the territorial capital, Evelyn found herself standing beside Judah in the torchlight, hardly able to believe how completely their lives had changed in a single evening. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "No," Judah replied, looking around at the faces of the townspeople who were seeing him clearly for the first time. "It's just beginning." Mayor Caldwell approached them with obvious embarrassment, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Kane, Mrs. Carrington, I owe you both an apology. The whole town does. We let prejudice blind us to the truth." Judah studied the mayor's face, then looked around at the assembled crowd. Some still showed skepticism, others curiosity, but the casual dismissal was gone. He was no longer invisible. "People see what they expect to see," he said simply. "Maybe now they'll expect something different." As the excitement died down and the townspeople began to drift back to their homes, Judah's father approached on his horse, his face gray with exhaustion and pain. "Son," he said quietly, "I know I got no right to ask, but—" "You're dying," Judah interrupted, not unkindly. "And you're my father. That gives you the right to come home." The simple forgiveness in his voice brought tears to the older man's eyes. As Evelyn watched father and son embrace for the first time in 18 years, she understood that the real victory of this night wasn't about silver or land or legal documents. It was about worth finally recognized, love finally expressed, and the courage to build something better from the ashes of old mistakes. 6 months later, the simple silver bands caught the morning sunlight as Evelyn and Judah stood hand in hand on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their hand zone scarred from years of hard labor, the other smooth from a life of privilege, joined as equals in marriage. The rings had been forged by Pete McCready from silver extracted from Judah's own claim, a symbol more precious than any expensive jewelry because it represented the partnership they'd built together. Not the union of a wealthy woman and her hired hand, but the marriage of two people who'd discovered their true worth through each other's eyes. "Hard to believe it's the same place," Tom Garrett observed, joining them on the porch with his morning coffee. The old cowboy had stayed on as ranch supervisor, his loyalty rewarded with a partnership stake in what had become the most profitable operation in the territory. The transformation was indeed remarkable. The Lazy Sea Ranch now sprawled across 5,000 acres, its boundaries encompassing both the original property and additional land purchased with proceeds from the silver mine. New buildings dotted the Landscapier modern bunkhouse for the 20 hands they now employed, a horse barn that was the envy of every rancher for 100 miles, and a schoolhouse where Judah taught reading and arithmetic to children from 3 neighboring counties. The school had been Evelyn's idea, but Judah had embraced it with the passion of someone finally living his childhood dream. His patient teaching methods and genuine care for struggling students had transformed him from the town's most dismissed citizen to one of its most respected. Parents who'd once refused to acknowledge his existence now sought his advice about their children's education. "Mr. Kane," a small voice called from the yard, "are you still going to tell us about the silver mine today?" 8-year-old Martha Henderson, granddaughter of the woman who'd once swept her porch to avoid his presence, skipped up to the house with the easy familiarity of a favored student. Behind her trailed 6 other children, all eager for the weekly geology lesson that had become a highlight of their education. Of course, Judah replied, his face lighting up with the joy that teaching always brought him. But first, what did we learn about mineral formations last week? As the children enthusiastically recited their lessons, Evelyn felt her heart swell with pride and contentment. This was the life they'd built together, not just profitable, but meaningful. The silver mine provided the financial foundation, but their true wealth lay in the community they'd created, the lives they'd touched, and the love they'd discovered in each other. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the road, where Dr. Hayes was arriving for his weekly visit to Judah's father. The older man had defied medical expectations by surviving the winter, his will to live strengthened by reconciliation with his son. Though still frail, he'd found purpose in helping manage the mine's operations, his decades of land office experience proving invaluable in navigating territorial bureaucracy. "How is he today?" Evelyn asked as the doctor dismounted. "Stubborn as always," Dr. Hayes replied with a fond smile, insisting he's well enough to travel to Denver for the Territorial Mining Commission meeting next week. The commission meeting was importante, formal hearing to establish precedents for mineral rights claims throughout Colorado Territory. Judah's case had become a landmark, proving that proper documentation could protect small claimants from corporate exploitation. The territorial governor had specifically requested his testimony about fair mining practices. "Let him go," Judah said quietly. "He's earned the right to see this through to the end." There was acceptance in his voice, the understanding that his father's time was limited, but that their remaining months together had been a gift neither had expected. The bitter young man who'd blamed his son for his wife's death had been replaced by someone who took fierce pride in Judah's accomplishments. As Dr. Hayes headed toward the house to check on his patient, Evelyn noticed a familiar figure approaching from the direction of town. Marcus Bellweather's former assistant, a nervous young man named Timothy Walsh, had been working as a clerk at the general store since his employer's imprisonment. "Mrs. Kane," he called out formally, the title, still brought Evelyn a thrill of happiness. "I have a letter from the territorial prison." Judah accepted the envelope with curiosity. Correspondence from Bellweather had arrived sporadically over the past months, usually containing increasingly desperate pleas for financial assistance or legal intervention. This letter, however, felt different. "What does he say?" Evelyn asked as Judah read silently. "He's dying," Judah said simply. "Consumption, like my father. He wants to make amends before the end." The letter was surprisingly humble, stripped of the arrogance and manipulation that had characterized Bellweather's previous communications. In careful, measured language, he acknowledged his crimes, apologized for the pain he'd caused, and expressed genuine remorse for the prejudice that had driven his actions. "Do you believe him?" Evelyn asked. Judah was quiet for a long moment, studying the letter. "I think facing death has a way of clearing a man's vision. He's lost everything, his freedom, his reputation, his family's respect. Maybe that's enough to teach him the truth about worth. Will you visit him?" "I think so. Not for his sake, but for mine. I want him to see what we've built here, what happens when people are judged by their character instead of their circumstances." As if summoned by their conversation about redemption, the children gathered around Judah for their promised lesson about the silver mine. Watching him explain geological formations with the same patience he brought to teaching reading, Evelyn marveled at the transformation that love and recognition had wrought. This was the man the town had dismissed as worthless now, teaching their children, managing a fortune, and commanding respect through quiet competence and unwavering integrity. The scarred hands that had once symbolized only hard labor now gestured expressively as he described the formation of precious metals deep in the earth. "Just like people," he told the children, his voice carrying across the yard. "Sometimes the most valuable things are hidden beneath rough surfaces. It takes patience and the right conditions to bring out their true worth." The lesson was as much for the adults listening from porches and windows throughout the valley as for the eager young faces surrounding him. In teaching these children about geology, Judah was also teaching their parents about seeing past surface appearances to recognize inherent value. As the sun climbed higher and the children departed for their afternoon chores, Evelyn slipped her hand into Judah's, feeling the familiar comfort of his strength. The simple silver band on her finger caught the light, a symbol of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. "No regrets?" she asked softly. Judah's smile transformed his entire face, the expression of a man who'd finally found his place in the world. "Only that it took us so long to find each other." In the distance, the silver mine continued its steady production, funding not just their prosperity, but a school, improved medical facilities for the town, and opportunities for other dismissed individuals to prove their worth. The wealth that had been stolen was now being used to build something lasting, a community where value was measured in character rather than circumstances. They said he was worthless, but they were wrong. Dead wrong. And in proving them wrong, Judah Kane had done something even more important. Had shown everyone around him how to see the hidden worth in themselves.